So hi, everyone. I am Niriksha Shetty, CEO of Precision Development. First of all, I want to say welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. At the outset, our apologies for some of the scheduling snafus, but we're genuinely delighted to see so many of you here. And for us, the intention behind doing this is this reminder that so many of us are working through so many of the same questions. At PXT, scaling impact has been our whole reason for existing. And 10 years in, we've become convinced that a strong learning infrastructure is as foundational as any program we run. We see it as a prerequisite for impact at scale. However, operationalizing a learning culture is harder than it sounds. And so we're still very much figuring that part out. And today is part of that ongoing journey for us. One concrete step we have taken is building an experiment registry. It's a way for us to document and share what we've tested, what we've learned, so that knowledge doesn't stay siloed. In a few minutes, my colleague Tomoko Harigaya will walk you through that. We're also really fortunate to have two wonderful guests who will be joining us today, Noam Angrist from Youth Impact and Elia Gandolfi from the Agency Fund. Elia will kick us off with how the Agency Fund has been supporting organizations that embed learning into their operations. And then you'll hear from Noam and Tomoko about what it actually looks like in practice at both Youth Impact and PXT. Before I hand over to Elia, a few quick housekeeping notes. First, a heads up that this webinar is being recorded and will be made publicly available. Your video and audio should be disabled, so feel free to follow along without worry. We also have a Q&A box for any questions that come to mind. You're welcome to post under your name or anonymously. We will save questions for the end and invite our panelists to respond to a selection. PXT's Assistant Director for Research, Caitlin, will help facilitate that. Thanks again, everyone. Really excited to have you here. Elia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Nirik, and I'm so happy to be here. I work at the Agency Fund. The Agency Fund is an accelerator. We brand an accelerator called Lighthouse Accelerator, whose mission is exactly helping nonprofit answering this question that we are seeing here. How do we become more cost effective? How do we increase our impact? And how do we increase our scale? In other words, how do we move together with NGOs up this curve? Over the past 3 years, we have worked with dozens of nonprofits that moved up this curve at different pace. Actually, Precision Development and Youth Impact are among our best examples on how to do it well. There is one overwhelming pattern that we are seeing in organizations that are good at scaling cost effectively, that organizations that achieve order of magnitude increase in scale and an order of magnitude reducing cost while increasing their impact. That one common pattern is a learning culture. Every single one of these organizations have a strong embedded learning, iterative learning culture. What does it mean in practice? It means having the people, the tools, and the practices in order to understand what is happening in your program, the metrics and the data systems to see how your users are moving through your program, but most importantly, understanding the why behind certain behavior, like why certain things are happening and how do I make them better. This is in a nutshell the learning muscle that we are seeing in this organization. So if it's just about one thing, why don't we all do it? Because it's hard. It's very hard to build this iterative learning muscle. And we tend to classify these barriers in two big buckets. There is a cultural bucket of barriers that Noam will tell us more in detail about in a minute. Today, I'm going to tell you about the technical barriers to building this muscle. Next slide, please. Okay, there are three main barriers that we see over and over again in organization technically approaching running experiment at scale. First of all, is capacity. If we compare ourselves with the big private sector enterprises, we don't have 20 engineers working on our data architecture, nor 20 statisticians running experiment full time. We are resource constrained in terms of staff, and also we don't have $50,000 to invest in an A/B testing platform or to pay a consultant to do it. We need to find these solutions in-house with our low resources. The next barrier is the fit, in the sense that all these commercial learning tools and experimentation tools are built for users that are tech literate, are built for application or website that optimize click-through rates or optimize conversion of your e-commerce platform. They're not built for farmers in villages with no internet connection and low tech literacy that need advisory on their crops. And the very last barrier is about the channels. All of us in the nonprofit sector, we operate a set of tools that do not natively integrate with these learning and experimentation platforms. We use Survey CTO and Conquer to reach users offline at the village. We use tools like Turn.io or Glyphic to meet our users where they are comfortable in WhatsApp. These tools do not integrate natively with the commercial tools available. So we have seen these pain points over and over again in nonprofits we are worked with, and we decided to build Evidential. Evidential is a platform as a service. What do I mean by that? It's a platform in the sense that it's a tool that helps you designing, executing, and monitoring and logging experiment. But it's a service also because it comes with a service from the Evidential team. We really help nonprofits building these muscles through this tool. So what does it do in practice? First of all, Evidential team embeds into the nonprofit for a little bit in order to build the muscle of identifying and generating hypotheses, prioritizing these hypotheses, designing the experiment. And then Evidential comes in. Evidential basically lifts all the technical burden of running experiment from your team. It does things like running power calculations for you or balance checks for you, or these annoying statistical things that you will have to do in code otherwise. It plugs natively in your data warehouse, or it connects natively with the tool nonprofit use. We just released an integration with Turn.io a few days ago. It lets you design, execute the experiment, and monitor in a nice dashboard in real time. And it acts as an experiment registry. You can have your experiment there with a log of your impact. It keeps your data where it is. It doesn't need to read any data. It keeps your data safe in your infrastructure, and it's free and open source. We have a cloud offering. You can use our cloud offering, or you can self-host it. So all of these together allow nonprofit to cut their experimentation time from months to days. Next slide, please. A very quick overview on the result. This is a tool we have developed with ID Insight in collaboration with them. We are almost 1 year in. 1 year in, we are seeing 13 organizations using the tools, with 30 more interested. We run more than 30 experiments, and we are seeing some big gains. The examples we're most proud of is precision development. Tomoko will show us in a second some of the experiments they've run there, which are really impressive. We have seen other organizations, as you see here, hitting big gains. The important thing here is not about it's to understand that this didn't come out of nowhere. Noam will tell us a lot about this now. These are the result of a culture of iterative learning. All these organizations started somewhere, ran a bunch of experiments that were not significant, but at every experiment, they learn a little bit more about their users and their program for the next hypothesis to be better. And at some point, they started hitting the jackpot. They started hitting 2x response rate or almost 2x engagement lift. This is the outcome of a culture of iterative learning. From our end, we try to make all this easier by giving you a free and open source tool that you can operate without additional overhead. Please reach out. You have our contact here if you're interested in trying the tool. But most of all, I look forward to hear from Noam how this iterative learning culture is actually built. They have fantastic examples. So thank you so much. Over to Noam.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah, to continue the iterative learning spirit, we'll just follow on from those great presentations. So yeah, I'll dive in. I'll share a few concrete examples and maybe just a quick word on Youth Impact. We founded Youth Impact to scale evidence-based interventions backed by RCTs. And along the way, we realized, maybe not surprisingly, that there was a lot more to learn, and that the initial RCT was a great foundation, but that was just the beginning, not the end. And so we turned to an approach that we felt would get the best of RCTs, but be a bit more embedded in implementation, iterative and nimble. And so we brought in the kind of frameworks of A/B testing and adapted them from the tech sector to the social sector. And we use both techniques, and A/B testing in particular is a technique that we use a lot, and we're always learning. So we've got a 15-person research team. We test every program, every term in every country. So I'll share more of that in just a second. Okay, next slide. Do I click or something? Okay, great. Yes, I'll just share a few principles. We can dive into those. Some of these principles are borrowed, and some we've kind of put some structure on what we found really works for us. And these are living and breathing. So we also welcome people's collective brain as we refine this as a sector. So one central goal for A/B testing is optimization. It's a nimble, rigorous way to optimize. The goal is really to progress from the question, does the program work, to can it work better or cheaper? So it's really an optimization tool, a rigorous, nimble optimization tool, often getting at elements of cost effectiveness, scalability, and adaptation. Next. So 3 R's we've started to use to characterize A/B testing. They're not the only things that characterize A/B testing, but we find these capture a few of the core elements very succinctly. So the first R, we can pull that up, is rigorous. So like RCTs, A/B tests are randomized, and randomization is what gets you causality. If you randomize 2 groups, they're equal for all intents and purposes. And so any tweak you make, you can attribute the change in the outcome to that tweak. And that's the rigor. That's a lot of the rigor. People often think randomization is expensive and slow. It's not. You can literally flip a coin. You can see the icon there as a coin flip because it's actually cheap and quick. Randomization is not the expensive and slow part, but it is what gives you the rigor often. The expensive and slow part is just the way that randomization is often done, but you can do it faster and cheaper if you collect different types of data at higher frequency. So I'll come back to that. But we still do the randomization. One slight distinction from the traditional randomized control trial is we don't always include a control group. Though you can include a control group, but we don't always include a control group, hence A versus B. So it's version A versus version B. And so there the question is, does version A or B work differently? So everyone's getting something, but someone's getting a bit of a tweak. And so that's also why the question is not just does it work, but does it work better? Does it work cheaper? Now you can think about the cascade of how you organize this. You could start with an RCT to have proof of concept, and then you don't need to do an RCT again. You can now shift to A/B testing. Vice versa, you could actually do A/B testing before an RCT to kind of tweak things and improve things before you do the really high stakes thing. So yes, that's the R. Next. The second R is rapid. So this is a key distinction from the typical study, where a really core thing for A/B testing is doing it quickly. And so getting results within weeks and months rather than years, this is really critical because a core part of A/B testing is to inform decision-making in real time. And therefore, you need data and outcomes that you can collect quickly. And so we have some more heuristics around this. We refer to something we call the golden indicator. This is an indicator that you collect quickly enough and is enough to make a decision. So some indicators you collect quickly, but decision makers don't find it enough to make a call. So often the indicators that are golden we find are kind of in the middle of the theory of change. They're sort of downstream enough, they're convincing, but they're not so downstream that it takes forever to collect and use them. And then the final R is regular. And so the A/B tests are not single tests. They're a repeated practice 5 times, 10 times, 50 times. And it's really a process of innovation. To make this possible, you often have to use data that's in your M&E system. It's often not ad hoc surveys. It's sort of part of the regular monitoring and evaluation system. And it takes many tries to actually get breakthroughs. Like any innovation process, there's multiple failures, and then there might be one or two big successes that kind of pay for the whole thing. So it's really an ongoing learning and innovation process where the returns really come through. Next slide. Okay, so that's kind of one set of frames to think about. Another framework we found really helpful is when getting in terms of into specific types of questions and tests, we found it helpful to distinguish between effectiveness enhancing tests. So these are tests where you're adding something and you want to see if it improves things at low cost. There's another type of test which we don't often test, which we refer to as cost reducing tests. And this is you're taking something away and you want to see that it's no worse. So in health, this would be called kind of a non-inferiority trial. And so this is really important because actually there's a lot of cost savings and efficiencies to be gained from this. But here you're actually looking for a zero effect because there's no difference. That's a little bit harder to power statistically, but it can be done and is really important. And we found really interesting cases with this one. Next. So just to give a sense of how many of these we've run, and one thing I should say, so Youth Impact delivers health and education programs and tests them, but we're not an ed tech organization. We're not a tech organization. So we actually have these data flows happening that are kind of built into a service delivery system. And so, it's most tractable to kind of do this when you are working within a technology, because then you have a lot of built-in data. But we've actually done this for kind of classroom interventions, school interventions, not always just interventions mediated through a phone or a tablet or what have you, or a computer, though there's even, there's lots of opportunity, even more opportunity. But here we've actually done it in kind of a full traditional service delivery social setting. So we've run about 75, now actually more, 74 and more tests, including RCTs and A/B tests. And as I mentioned before, we continue to run more and more, and we run a test on every program in every country, every school term. And the pace continues to build. We have a 15-person research team, as I mentioned, that helps facilitate this process. Next slide. We recently codified a toolkit with partners here, including the agency fund, to try to codify some principles, some cases. So feel free to scan this barcode or look on the website and make as much use of this as you'd like, and also would love feedback as well on what's helpful to facilitate folks' A/B testing journey. Next slide. So I'll give some concrete examples to bring this to life. So here is a kind of sequence of tests that we ran. So we have a program that was a phone call tutoring program that we developed during COVID. Very simple. Families get a text message, and they also get a phone call from a teacher or a tutor. And they then get instruction in basic numeracy. And once the child grasps the concept, they move on to a harder concept. That's the basic intervention. So in the first kind of rounds, we compared the phone calls with the text to the phone call, to just the text without the phone call. You can imagine texts on their own are very cheap, very scalable. But unfortunately, we found that the text messages on their own just weren't enough. But because they're so cheap and scalable, in round two, what you can see there, the next kind of step in the staircase, is we doubled the dosage of the SMSs. Still, it wasn't enough. So it's cheaper. You can see that with the fewer dollar signs, but it wasn't effective enough. And so that's when we realized actually the phone calls were going to be really critical to find the sweet spot of scalability and effectiveness. The next thing that we tested is one of the biggest frictions to the phone call tutoring is scheduling with a household. Often a lot of time is spent saying, are you available? Are you not available? And in fact, the majority of time was spent scheduling rather than tutoring. And so one suggestion that came from the field, and often the best A/B test questions come from the field implementers, is what if when we get a hold of the household, we keep them on the phone a bit longer? And then we call them every other week instead of every week. And so we're still doing things, so the typical dosage was 20 minutes once a week, 40 minutes every other week is actually the same dosage, it just distributed differently and more efficiently. And so the question there was, is that just as good? And it's cheaper. It's kind of a version of a cost reducing test. And there we found it was just as good. So you can see here, we actually wanted an equal sign. So we adopted it. And now we had a 40-minute call. And then the other question that came forward was, okay, now we have 40 minutes. Can we get the parents more involved when we call into the household to tutor? And so halfway through the call, we encouraged the caregiver or the parent to take over the call. And about half did, and that doubled the impact of the program at almost no cost, virtually zero cost. And that's actually one of the most cost-effective tweaks we've ever tested, and it's actually one of the most cost-effective education interventions in the literature. It's so cost-effective. Now, interestingly, so this shows a few things. One, it takes multiple tries to kind of get the breakthrough innovation. Two, the sequential learning is really powerful. Sometimes learning happens in parallel. We've actually seen sequential learning be really powerful because each test leads to the next. So if we actually didn't have a 40-minute call, we couldn't have had enough time for the caregiver to take over. So we find the sequential learning is really powerful. Next slide. Okay, so this is an example of that program. I've just kind of talked you through it. So you get the call and you get the SMS. Next slide. Okay, I think that was supposed to come sooner. Somehow the order got a little flipped. We can flip through. This I already covered. So we can flip through now. You see the nice animations. Okay, so that's one set of A/B tests, but there's multiple other types of questions you can ask, and I'll give you a few more examples. So one very common question that comes up, one of the biggest costs in education systems is coaching, teacher coaching, and kind of school visits. They're often very expensive, but very effective. And can you do them virtually? Can you do them through a phone call instead of an in-person visit? Another big question is what happens when government implementers do something relative to NGO staff. That's another great example of a set of A/B test questions. Another one is the details of kind of what's happening in the classroom. So you can see here in the context of an education intervention, how you group the students in the classroom is actually very make or break, getting into those details. So often the devil is in the details, and that's where the most interesting questions are. Next slide. Okay, so let me just give you one more example. So here's an example on that question of teacher coaching. So this is an example from Namibia. The earlier example I gave you is from Botswana. In Namibia, it's one of the most rural countries in the world, a lot of kind of off-roading to get to schools. And so in Namibia, going to do school visits by monitors and coaches is very expensive and very difficult. And so what we did was in group A, we kind of kept the normal protocol of 2 school visits per term. And this is actually with the government. So it's an NGO supporting the government. And then in group B, we did 1 school visit initially, build trust, build relationship. But the second coaching was through a phone call. And here we wanted to see, it's a cost reducing test, if it's cheaper, but just as good. Next slide. Okay, so here you can see the results. So you can see the baseline learning level. These are learning levels. Actually, one of the things that we have in a lot of our systems for our education programs is learning levels on basic numeracy. Can you add, subtract, multiply, divide? And we collect that data very frequently, every 15 to 30 days. So it's very consequential and it changes very rapidly. So it's a golden indicator, as I was referencing earlier. And here you can see the level. So level 1 would be about addition. Level 2 would be about subtraction. And so you can see at baseline in group A, the starting level is about level 1. By end line, that goes up to level 2. In group B, where they're only getting 1 visit and then the second coaching is a call, it actually goes up very similar. So it kind of goes from 1 to about 2. So there was actually no statistically significant difference between these 2 tests. You get a similar impact. And so you can see that. And then in that table, you can see the cost. And so you can see the impact and the cost. So the impact is very similar, almost just 1% difference, and it's not statistically significant. But the cost varies quite a bit. So version A of the program, and this is actually the total program. So this is not just the coaching. This is the entire program with the coaching, is about $11 per child. Version B, again, the whole program, just now with the coaching being a little bit cheaper, is $7.4 per child. So this is a huge difference. It's about a 33% difference in cost. So this test actually has saved us 33% cost, which is enormous, a huge efficiency gain. Okay, next slide. So now I'll give you a final set of examples from a dozen A/B tests. So because I said A/B testing is regular, really the returns are when you group a batch of A/B tests together. So this is 12 tests that's from a similar program to the one I shared earlier, phone call tutoring. We did 12 rapid trials in succession. We have this out as a working paper. So if people want to see this paper, take a look. And it kind of batches a group of tests together very nicely, and I think provides a useful use case and example from a series of tests that are put together. Next slide. So this is a summary figure of the test. Some of these are ones I referred to before, but now there's more as well. And so you can see one group is on the effectiveness enhancing tests. And so there are a few examples. And then the y-axis is a metric of efficiency, and I can describe that more. So one, for example, is adding kind of, so you can see there's tech package add-ons. So one is the SMS and call. One is adding videos via WhatsApp. Another is kind of sending homework questions. Then we have a category around motivational nudges, so kind of testimonials from other households and parents. And then we have stuff on caregiver engagement. So that's caregivers kind of taking over the call. What you can essentially see in the effectiveness enhancing tests is sometimes it's a hit, sometimes it's a miss. So you can see there's a few tests that didn't work at all. So sending more videos on WhatsApp, we didn't get any more efficiency gain. Testimonials, we didn't get efficiency gain. A lot of the nudges, we didn't get efficiency gain. Sometimes, like some of the SMS message compliments, some of the homework compliments, they were slightly effective, but so cheap that we got an efficiency gain. But then where we really saw consistent gains was the caregiver takeover. That we saw huge effects. We actually tested that twice, and there we saw huge efficiency gains. I was referencing that earlier. On the right-hand side, you can see cost-reducing tests. And there, again, this is you're taking something away. You want to see that it's no worse, so we can quantify the efficiency gain and reduce costs. And here you can see actually all the tests produce an efficiency gain, which is fascinating. So one thing that we've seen is cost-reducing tests almost always produce an efficiency gain. Not saying it's always true, but often you can take more away than you think, and your program's just as good. Whereas the effectiveness-enhancing tests hit and miss, but when it's effective, it's really effective. So you can see the efficiency gain for cost-reducing is a little smaller, but more consistent. And you can see things like the weekly versus bi-weekly that I mentioned. We've also tried things for this program like changing the tutor. So instead of having the same tutor each week, you change the tutor, and that makes it much easier to schedule. So again, it reduces costs, and we see that doesn't reduce effectiveness. Next slide. So I'll just end with some kind of bigger picture points on organizational attributes to do this type of learning and to kind of facilitate this approach. So one I've talked about is the criticalness of having golden indicators. So these are indicators that are fast enough that they can inform real-time decisions. A core part of A/B testing is to be a decision-making tool, but also that they're downstream enough to make meaningful decisions. So sometimes we've seen indicators that are very rapid, decision makers won't make a call with them, because when you make a call, you're making a trade-off. So you need to be convinced. Vice versa, if it's very compelling, maybe for our health programs at reducing teen pregnancy, that's very powerful, but that takes 9 to 12 months. So that's not decision fast enough. So you need to find these sweet spot indicators in the middle. Another really key aspect is there needs to be a data flow. So this approach doesn't work with ad hoc surveys. It has to be part of an M&E system with data flow. So this is things that are in the M&E system that are collected regularly and at large scale. And that's the backbone of this learning infrastructure. Next slide. A few other pieces. So one is having a learning culture, and I can talk more about this, but really building that into the fiber of the organization, a willingness to be wrong, a willingness to question, comfort with uncertainty, a desire to learn. So I can talk more about things that we do to facilitate that. Another is an ability to tweak. You have to be able to change things. So if your systems are too rigid, you don't have the ability to tweak and to iterate. So that's very important. You do have to be committed for the long haul. It takes 5 to 10 rounds to get really interesting results. This is an investment in ongoing learning. It's not always a quick win, actually. So it's a commitment, and that's really important. And finally, an internal data savvy team is really important. So at Youth Impact, I mentioned we have many staff on this. We've really invested in it. Half of them have PhDs, so they're really kind of into this process. But you don't necessarily need that. We actually started this process with just 1 to 2 folks, mid-career, really passionate about data, and they got the engine running. Now we have a very sophisticated operation, but at the beginning it was much leaner, and it kind of got things moving. But that is really critical to have an internal data savvy team. These processes can't be outsourced. They have to be built in-house. There can be technical assistance and guidance, and that can be really helpful, especially to get things started. But eventually there needs to be an internal full-time team that really takes forward the data systems. Next slide. Yes, and then a shout out to wonderful partners who have made this possible and been on the journey, been on the learning journey about how to be on a learning journey, and it continues. So thanks so much, and looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Thanks, Elia and Noam. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Okay, so I'm going to build on Noam's presentation and talk a little bit more about kind of institutional aspects of learning and collective learning time. And I want to just start with what iterative learning means in practice. So at its core, sorry, I'm not sure. Nick, is the slide? Can you? Yeah, okay. At its core, it means learning, testing ideas for rolling them out, and which of course sounds obvious, but requires discipline and capacity to do it well and consistently. And this is just echoing what Elia mentioned earlier. It also means accepting that our instincts are often wrong and building the systems that make testing as routine rather than something we do when we have extra time and extra funding. And I think the hardest part has been kind of shifting from kind of learning as a separate activity to learning as part of how we operate day to day. As Nimeksha mentioned, this is something that we are still figuring out, but today I just want to share what we've learned so far. Next slide, please. Sorry, is everybody able to hear me?
Tomoko, now we can. I think your internet is a bit spotty, so if that continues, maybe you just want to turn your video off.
Okay. Okay, let me continue, but please do let me know if you're hearing me. Okay, so again, a few months ago, we released the Experiment Registry, which provides summaries of 80 of the experiments we've run over the years across geographies. And we initially started the registry when we realized the teams were asking the same questions to each other. Should we test this or that? And do we know anything about these design tweaks? So this was really an effort to reduce the cost of learning within PXD. Most of our experiments fall into one of 2 categories: tests of whether digital advisory works at all or digital messaging works at all, and tests of which version works best. So let me just give you a quick look at the registry. Can you go to the next slide, Nick? Okay, so Nick has shared the link to the registry. This is the registry home. At the top, you'll find a brief description of what it captures. And you can filter experiments by location, status, so ongoing or complete, start date, and research tag. And you can also search by keyword if you're looking for something specific. Each row shows those details at glance, and then clicking on the plus sign expands it to show the full abstract. To see the complete entry, you can just click on the title and you'll see the detailed design, sample size, and summary results there. And then if you want to work with the entire registry content directly, again, right now it's 80 experiments in the registry. You can go back to the registry home and then click on the CSV export button. So it downloads the full list. So you can filter and analyze however you like. This is a public view. It's open to anyone, who want to explore it. And when we took stock of findings from these experiments, we saw some consistent patterns. So, I'll just talk through some of them quickly. The most fundamental one is digital advisory works, right, across geographies, crops, and delivery channels. And that's really been our foundation, at least. But the next two findings have really shaped how we think about our work. So effects are especially large when farmers are facing something urgent and unpredictable. So, for example, weather shocks and pest problems. And that's really pushed us to think hard about how to provide more real-time information, relevant real-time information and advice, like weather forecasts. And then third, the biggest wins don't come from applying behavior theories in the abstract, but they come from identifying a specific friction point and removing it. So for example, you might see in the data that many farmers are dropping off in the first 10 seconds of voice advisory messages because of the long introduction jingle, or a farmer who couldn't access content in their own language. You can see all of that in the data. And when fixing those actual observed barriers, we saw larger engagement gains. But when we tested message framing, especially in early years based on behavioral concepts without specific farmer context, we often saw little effects. So this has really made us more attuned to checking farmer reactions as we hypothesize and design, and then letting those observations really inform the questions that we ask. And for us, these kinds of insights have led to two quite different forms of action within PXD, I think. Some decisions are, quick and clean. So you tweak a design feature, you look at the data, get a clear answer, and then implement the design change or not. As kind of Noam talked through, this might take, several tries, but there's a clear kind of design decision that you can implement or not implement, and you see some examples on the left. But more consequential decisions don't often work that way. So there's no single, set of experiments that told us to invest heavily in weather risk management, for example. It started with early evaluations that gave us enough confidence to invest and build out digital advisory services. And then from there, you do a series of design experiments, showing us that, over time, effects were larger when farmers were facing unanticipated shocks. And findings from both kind of internal and external experiments and studies really kind of over time reduced uncertainty around that, and kind of pushed us to decide to invest in these climate risk mitigation areas. So that's a different kind of learning. It's not one experiment, one decision, but slowly building and understanding and updating our beliefs across many rounds of evidence. And what we've learned, and again, kind of echoing both Elia and Noam, it's not just about method, right? Method is only part of it. We've been trying to build the capacity to ask the right questions and act on what we find, which brings me to a related point again about the iterative learning kind of becoming easier when the cost of running experiments and gathering and analyzing data comes down. And that's where, a tool like Evidential makes a real difference. This is the experiment engine that Elia introduced earlier. So let me just talk through one concrete example. So this is an experiment we ran recently in the last 6 months using Evidential. The context here is that creating high quality, localized advisories at scale is labor intensive, and it requires agronomists and data scientists to make sense of complex context-specific variables. And we wanted to know whether AI could support this task without losing the quality of the device and farmer engagement. So we ran an A/B test across 3 groups: human narrated content, so that's business as usual; AI scripted with human audio; and then fully AI scripted with AI audio advisory. So the graph on the slide shows mean differences in service engagement. Here it's measured as the average proportion of advisory calls farmers listen to. And you can see that the full AI group, which is the second, of that bar, the green bar that you see, actually did slightly better than the human-generated advisory in terms of the engagement. But the point here is not so much the result, but the speed at which we got this clear, interpretable result. This graph was generated automatically by Evidential, and then pulling data directly from our engagement database. So there was almost kind of no cost to us once that this was set up. And this is the kind of a test that previously required significant design plan analysis time and, of course, people capacity. So again, tools and processes that reduce the cost of learning really matter. Okay, so I'll just end with where we are headed. So on the technical side, there are questions that we haven't been able to answer yet, and you can see some of the examples on the top. But the big challenge, I think, is again organizational. We've made more progress at learning within PXD than at making the learning useful beyond us. And the registry and making the registry public is one step forward in that effort. But I think the deeper institutional challenge is kind of ensuring that once insights are out, they don't stay siloed, that they move across teams, across organizations, and hopefully into even the governments running these services, and influencing the decisions that matter. So that's what we want to do more in the next phase, bringing down the cost of learning for both PXD and for the sector. So I'll stop here.
Great. Thank you so much to all of our speakers, to Elia, Noam, and Tomoko, for your insightful presentations and the candidness in discussing your experiences with our audience today. I'll start with a round of questions that we have, one for each of our panelists, and then I'll go to some of our Q&A box questions that we've received. Please do continue to add questions to that Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can. So starting things off, this one's for Elia first. What have you observed about how different organizations approach experimentation using Evidential or more generally, and kind of how they approach their knowledge sharing? Are there things that you've seen that are working particularly well? And if you could share about those experiences.
Yeah, thanks. Great question. And it relates to one question that was asked in the chat, the first one that was asked about what are the skill set. We see 2 things that are critical preconditions that really differentiate the organization that reach out to us and 2 months later are running 3-4 A/B tests versus the organization that we never hear back from. These 2 things are: you need a leadership push for experimentation. This is unnegotiable. We have heard from leaders today that really have embedded that culture in their companies, in their organization, and that needs to come from leadership. You need to create a safe space. Noam said it well. You need to create a safe space to fail, to come up with ideas, first of all, and you need leaders to push to go and listen for these ideas. Because it's hard for these hypothesis and idea to come back to you unless you make it a safe space to express it. That's overwhelmingly the precondition. We sometimes get many engineers that come to us because they see a fancy new tool and they want to try it out. They often never get to run a single test because once they realize it's still an investment to run this test. Maybe you don't need to invest in engineering and in tooling, but it's still an investment in people's time to think and execute on these things. If you don't have your leaders on your side, that's never going to work. That's a big barrier. The second barrier is actually more technical. That is data flows. Noam said it well. You need your metrics in place. You need to have very clear what are the critical metrics that define your program success. Without those, you're just experimenting on random things And at some point, you will feel you're going nowhere. So start with the data, start with the user funnel in front of you on a piece of paper. How does my user enter my program, and how do they move to the graduation of my program? And attach metrics to those stages, even one metric per stage, and compute them somehow. In Excel, in your data warehouse, doesn't matter. That's the starting point for experimentation. That will literally show where the biggest gaps are and surface some of these ideas. If you have to bring two things back to your leaders, that will be those: leadership push and data flows and metrics in place.
Great, thanks so much. Next question for Noam. Your organization has scaled to over 300 staff across 20 plus countries. It's very impressive. How do you instill a testing and learning culture as an organization grows? If you can share any kind of practical approaches you've worked on or things that haven't worked for your staff.
Yes. Just one example, and that I will say it is very embedded. It actually surprises me pleasantly just how embedded it is. Often kind of debates and questions will come up with folks not on the research team, and program teams will say, let's A/B test that. Or, business development teams will say, let's A/B test that. Or HR will say, let's A/B test that. So it's actually really kind of embedded throughout. I think part of that, the reason for that, so Elia mentioned, leadership cares about it. That makes a huge difference, of course. But I actually think I would go all the way on the other side of that as well. So I think part of it is leadership cares, but part of it is our questions, and I didn't talk about this as much. Almost all of our questions are sourced from the field. And so often, and actually tech has a great term for this, I don't know if people have heard it, but that the questions shouldn't come from the hippos, and they refer to hippos as the highest paid person's opinion. That's not where the questions should come from. And that often is where the questions come from, actually, in general in life. So the questions need to be from the front lines. One, because those are the real frictions to implementation and scale. That's kind of the key. And then people really want to know the answer. They really want to know the answer because it's going to make the program much better and simpler. And so that I think creates a culture of the questions matter to the work. Everyone gets to ask the question. And so that really builds this culture. And we have a sourcing process where we actually source the questions. We kind of review them. We make sure that they can be tested because there is some technical work to be done to ensure that it can be tested. It's the relevant test. But the questions are almost always sourced from the field. And we look for a few things. So one is it going to reduce cost? Is it going to improve effectiveness? Is it core to the implementation? There's a few other heuristics, though, that we use, actually. So another one, which is really important for this, is there genuine uncertainty? So if people feel very strongly, frontline implementers or decision makers feel very strongly, we have found that those don't make for the best questions. Why? And actually, if you kind of just to nerd out for a second, if you think about it in Bayesian terms, I don't know how familiar that is for the audience, that does follow that process, right? Where you have a very strong prior, new information won't be that informative, or it will take many, many rounds of learning to change your prior, right? And so then you might need to do 5 questions to overturn the prior. That could be worth it. I'm not saying it's not worth it, but it's a whole different investment. If the prior is loosely held, one question can really change your mind. So we find that that's also how the real world decision-making process works. So if people feel really strongly, and let's say we have this thing that we do, it's called an exit ticket. So it's kind of a question of the day. Teachers use it. They see if the kids learned what they taught. If they didn't, the teacher doesn't progress. If they did, they move on to something harder. We said, let's remove that. And the frontline team said, no, don't touch it. It's too good. We don't care what we learn. Like, we're doing that. That works for us. So again, it's not to say that we shouldn't test it, but we would have needed to do 5 rounds of testing for that to get real take up. So we didn't test it. It wasn't that interesting in the end. Then when there's things that have genuine uncertainty, people are saying, I'm not sure, could it go this way? Could it go that way? Then a test is really informative and it leads to action very quickly. So I think I saw someone in the chat say, okay, all this research is happening. Does it lead to change? Well, if you're doing it in a very embedded fashion, it leads to change right away. That's the whole point, actually. It's an embedded learning tool. So we actually, I think we have an 100% take up of our A/B test results. We've actually had almost no friction in getting the results taken on board in implementation. So all that is to say, I think the high up decision makers being on board matters, but also the field teams being deeply engaged in the process really is actually the key.
Great. Next question is for Tomoko. Making the experiment registry public includes publishing results that maybe didn't go the way that we expected. How have you navigated these unexpected results?
So yes, I think publishing no results was a deliberate choice, but I think honestly it wasn't a difficult one for us. I think in many ways we learned the most from the null results, especially when things we thought would work don't work. And that helps us kind of ask why, and that process of exploring further is kind of what leads to new ideas and new innovations. So I think if everything that we are doing just leads to better outcomes, maybe we are not taking enough risks to innovate. Of course, like I think it does require a certain kind of organizational discipline to make these all the results available. But I think in general, we all think of a new result as more of a piece of information rather than a failure. So, we run experiments not to really just judge, whether something is working or not, but it's more, for us, it's a learning tool. It's the objective is to learn how to do things better. So yeah, I think that's
Great. Okay, so taking some questions from the Q&A box. This is just kind of a pragmatic one. Anyone can feel free to jump in. When organizations are thinking about the skill sets that they need to run experiments and embed learning day to day, what should they be looking for? Feel free to jump in.
This is in the internal team that runs them. Yeah. So I think actually I would say that I think the first thing is building good data flows. I think without that you can't do the next part. And so that's really critical. Once you have that, then you can get into some of the other technicalities of units of randomization, statistical power, inference, all of that. But that's sometimes the same person. It's not always the same person. So yeah, I would just say I would kind of stage it. Start with people who can really build data flows, and then get into kind of the more fancy questions.
I would maybe just supplement that with saying, this can come across as like a quantitative or technology question only. And I think a big part of identifying what questions to test and what to do with the learnings is also having people on your team that are spending a lot of time. I think Noam addressed this with his hippo analogy, but having people that are, talking regularly with the users and sort of trying to figure out where the pain points are and how these insights actually translate to changes in the programs.
Okay, I'll go on to the next one. This one is asking about examples of working with national governments or domestic partners and kind of creating learning cultures within governments and those collaborations. Noam touched a bit on this already in talking about, kind of bringing the questions from the field. Perhaps, Tomoko, you might want to come in and share a little bit more about PXD's experience in this with some of our partners.
yeah. I think so. That's been something that we've been, working on in Ethiopia, Kenya. I think our starting point has been to kind of identify where the pain points for the governments are and understanding their barriers. I think it's similar to kind of the approach of, addressing farmer problems, right? Like the starting point is understanding the challenges of the kind of target audiences, here. So both farmers and in the case of working with governments, if they're trying to kind of institutionalize, a large-scale digital advisory services, they know kind of the biggest challenges. So I think that's been always the starting point. And I think in terms of kind of building these learning culture, one good example might be our work with the Agricultural Transformation Institute, ATI in Ethiopia. They've been running these nationwide hotline service for millions of farmers. And the process we set up was really kind of a collaborative one where we review the engagement data patterns every week, in joint meetings, identifying again jointly where the farmers are being stuck in the kind of process of accessing the information, brainstorming solutions and testing. So doing that all like collaboratively has really kind of helped creating the culture and successful experiment process.
Thanks, Tomoko.
And one thing I would just, if possible, to come in on that. I mean, one thing I think is interesting. So I think in some cases, we find it's possible to do it with government. I will say in other cases, we find it actually, there's another use case because governments, as we know, are not the nimblest, to say the least, right? They're sort of built to be bureaucratic and to scale, but they really struggle at nimbleness. I mean, it's actually one of the things they really struggle with. Depends on the government. There's some regions where governments do that more than others. But the governments always like a simpler thing. They always like a simpler, cheaper thing. And so one thing that we found really helpful, so we have had success running A/B tests with government and in government systems. But the main use case we found is when we can pressure test a simpler model in a kind of nimbler setup and then hand over a simpler MVP to the government. They love that. That's kind of, so the governments really like, we've found the outcomes and kind of outputs and simpler products from A/B testing, but running it themselves, that I think should be, as needed. So I think A/B testing is essential for governments, but not because they have to run it all the time, because it benefits the scaling process.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. As we think more about how to embed learning in government systems, I think that the big question is like which pieces of it can be really institutionalized and can be sustained within government, and then which pieces might actually sit outside even in the long term. So yeah, I agree with that.
Can't agree more with Noam and Tomoko. And the very last thing that we see as these programs scale through government is that in most cases, these government officials are not even used to track metrics. These government programs sometimes are so big that they are operating in the dark. So if you don't put a dashboard in front of them, you can hope for somebody to think about experimentation and A/B testing if they don't see these metrics in front of them already. So one thing that we found very effective is embedding those dashboard and observability into the program that you scale to the government. As they see those charts, it will be much easier to have the A/B testing conversation.
Great. Thank you so much. Nirksha, I'm going to hand it back to you for just a few closing statements since we're at time.
Great. Thanks, everyone. And I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions. I think we've tried to answer some on text. I just wanted to say thank you for joining. Nick has shared our email address in case you'd like to get in touch. I saw some questions about how to partner with this group, and we'd be happy to connect you more widely. I think there's a lot of learning opportunities collectively in this room. And we appreciate you listening and looking forward to continuing to build on this together. Thank you to Noam, Elia, and Tomoko for sharing their collective wisdom. And yes, thanks for joining. Take care. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.